Seconds while the waiting room trickles in. Omer, Andrew, Leslie, Jordan. What's up, y'all? Thanks for joining. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off, and if anyone else trickles into the waiting room, we'll let them in. Most of you I already know. I'm Shelby Stevens. I'm the co-founder of Growth Match and 1DA, the One Day Accelerator. My co-founder in both those endeavors is Zach. He's here with us today. And yeah, we're going to jump right into it. We're recording today as well for the folks who weren't able to attend live. So we'll get that recording out to them and to you in case you want to share it with anybody. So we're joined for the first in what will be a series of monthly workshops and webinars hosted by our company, growthmatch.com. This series is going to be a series of workshops presented by our specialists, the specialists who are on Growth Match. Growth Match is a marketplace where startups can find and hire fractional or part-time specialists across categories like growth marketing, sales, design, user research, fundraising, stuff like that. And Will is really, really experienced and talented. He is a messaging and positioning specialist that helps startups, obviously, on those topics, including things like marketing, content strategy, stuff like that. So Will is going to do a presentation on messaging and positioning. That'll go 25-30 minutes. Afterwards, he'll open it up for Q&A. So you can drop questions in real time in the chat as we go, and we'll get to those either he'll get to those either as we go along or save them for the Q&A afterwards. So with that, I'll turn it over to Will, and yeah, we can chat afterwards in the Q&A.
Shelby, thanks very much, and welcome all to today's presentation. And as Shelby says, we'll be taking Q&A, and since there's so few of us, let's just do it via voice. But if anything occurs to you during the session, please feel free to drop it into the chat panel. My name is Will Scott, and today we're going to be talking about messaging and positioning. So let me go to the inevitable slide deck, and here we go. All right, can I get a thumbs up if you can see that? Yeah. All right, good stuff. Messaging and positioning for startups. So we're going to be talking about messaging and positioning today. Phrases you may have heard already, but the first question is why? Yawn, how boring. Messaging and positioning. Why are we talking about that? Why aren't we talking about AI-enabled chatbots? Why aren't we talking about account-based management systems that take inbound signals from 25,000 websites, or embedding telemetry into your product-led growth products so you can trigger custom engagement campaigns? Why are we talking about messaging positioning? It's such a boring topic. I'm going to tell you why, because it is the foundation of absolutely everything you do going forward. In my business as an independent consultant and fractional CMO, the number of times I come across companies who are complaining that their campaigns aren't working. We're not getting a response on our LinkedIn adverts. We're not getting good attendance to the webinars. We're not getting conversion into sales qualified leads. We should just throw more money at the campaigns, more volume. The answer almost always is you've not thought about your messaging and positioning. Why is it that your target audience should care one whit about what it is you do? And that's what we've got to solve for in messaging positioning. So that's why we're doing messaging positioning. It allows our market, our audience, to put whatever it is you do into context of something that they're familiar with. So today, I want to run over a few tools. We should be together on the present slides for about 15 or 20 minutes, I hope. Then let's go to some questions, right? This is sort of the brief, high-level canter through some of the tools you can use in the land of messaging and positioning. So we're going to be talking about context setting, positioning, messaging, the different things, and storytelling. It's a passion of mine. I've got really sort of embedded in the last few years is storytelling. And you might think, well, why are we talking about stories? We're in the world of business. No one needs stories. Well, we're in stories for a very good reason. And I'll get to that in a bit. So let's begin with context setting. So what is it we mean by context setting? Well, here, what we want to do is demonstrate our credentials, demonstrate our credibility and our pedigree by showing our customers we understand the world that they live in. And here's a tool you can use. This is going to be available afterwards. I'm not sure the slides will, but certainly it's not a particularly complex thing. You want to be able to articulate, what is every company trying to do? What's happening in the world? My goodness, we've seen such changes over the last 2 years of the pandemic. There's shifts happening all over the place. Capture and crystallize what it is that's on top of their mind. And how are they trying to address this particular shift? Maybe you've got laggards who aren't doing anything about it or using DIY, or let's say, I don't know, you've got some kind of database tool and they're still using Excel, Visio, and PowerPoint, whatever it might be. Then you want to talk about what typically companies are doing. And then you want to talk about the right-hand side of the bell curve, what the most advanced companies are doing. And then when you want to talk about the challenges, what happens if they don't do anything about this? What's the consequence of them to their business if they don't do anything about this particular industry shift that might happen to them? So take a moment, take a pause, think about whatever it is you do today. I'm sure Shelby and Zach can do this for Growth Max. And what is the undeniable shift happening in the world? Well, it's becoming harder and harder to hire people, particularly in Austin. We've got this great resignation going. How do we get access to brilliant experts who allow us to progress our agenda and our team? That might be a shift going on. And how are people trying to address that? Or maybe trying to do the old-fashioned way, where they're trying to recruit full-time people, or maybe they've gone down the path of getting fractional help. So I'm going to encourage you all, before you do any other work when it comes to positioning templates and messaging templates and storytelling, is context setting. Now, this slide, if you complete it, probably will never see the light of day as is in front of a customer. That's not the point of this slide. The point of this slide is to inform you better as you start going to these next steps. You know, there's a great person who specializes in messaging positioning, and Zach and Shelby knows them, called April Dunford. I think that's her name. And she laments over a positioning template I'm going to show you in a bit, actually. And her problem with it is not what it's trying to do. Her problem with it is the expectation that you can just look at it and fill it in. And so when you go through messaging and positioning, a lot of introspection and contemplation is needed. And tools like this can help create those, or at least trigger those creative juices to help you understand the context in which you're positioning whatever it is you might happen to do within the context of what's important to the customer. You know, I can't tell you the number of slide decks I see from my clients over the years where slide 1 is about us and slide 2 is an incredibly complex technical architecture. Now, look, I get it. I'm an engineer by training as well. We want to show off how genius and brilliant that thing is that we bought, but no one cares about you and about you. What they care about is what you're going to do for them. And so your very opening statement needs to be about that end customer and what's important to them. Okay, moving on. So now we're on to positioning. Okay, positioning. This template's been around for many a year. It came from a guy called Jeffrey Moore, who wrote the very, very famous book, still relevant today, called Crossing the Chasm. And this is the template that April Dunford actually doesn't like. But she doesn't like what it's trying to do. She doesn't like that you're meant to look at it and just fill it in. But this is what you've got to do through that careful, contemplative process, is to complete. Who are you targeting? You know, I have to say, many a time I do have conversations when I ask this customer, who are you targeting? And the answer is anyone who buy from us, which is an answer. I'm not going to say it's a good answer. You know what? It turns out it's really, really tricky to market to everyone and anyone. We need to understand who specifically your target market is. And you might have variants of this. If you're targeting financial services, you're targeting healthcare, you might have variants of this. But who are you targeting and what do they want? What do you call your offer, obviously? And here, what is the category of your offer? Now, I know the temptation is to say, well, we're not like anything else out there. We're unique. There's nothing like us. Well, if you're not like anything, that's a really tough market to crack. It really is. You have to try and put yourself in the context of something people understand, because if you don't, they're either not going to get what it is you do or put you in the wrong category. So that's something you want to think about. What is the category of the thing that you offer? What do you most like? This allows me to initially anchor and say, okay, I see where you're going. I'm ready to hear more. If you tell me something, you know, we're in the flux capacitor business. I don't know what a flux capacitor is, so I'm tuning out at this point here. So think carefully about the category. What are you most aligned to? And sometimes it might be multiple categories. And one of the areas you might test is different areas in which you categorize yourself. You know, are you a database tool, or are you an analytics tool, or are you a BI tool, whatever it might be? Think about those different categories. Say what it is. What does it do? And here's really important. What's it unlike? Why is it different to the next best alternative? Why is it different not only from your competition, but what's also really important as well, and it's so often missed, time and time again is missed. You know what the biggest competitor is for almost every client I've ever worked with, ever, is status quo. it's doing nothing. That is the biggest competitor you're ever going to face, most likely, which is status quo, because people don't like change. People don't like friction. They don't like the unknown. And so oftentimes the easy answer is, I'm just going to carry on doing what I'm doing already. So talk about why you're different from not only the competitive alternatives, the better mousetraps out there, but also talk about why you're different than the house cat. I'm just going to let my cat take care of the mice, whatever it might be. Don't want to get cornered by my own analogy there. So let's stop that analogy right there. And then finally, what are the benefits? And I'm sure you've all heard about this as well, but I still see it time and time again when I go to the landing page of your website. In fact, I just had a client the other day. I was onboarding and I went and looked at the website and said, you know what? Your homepage seems to be a big list of features. And I get it. Features are important, right? But features is not benefits. So you've got to talk about benefits. You've got to talk about outcomes. Eventually, when you've stitched that through from your value proposition to your benefits and outcomes, stitch that steel thread through back to the features for sure. Okay, but I know Zach and Shelby don't begin their picture growth matches. And look, you have this great filtering capability. The pictures, you can find the right expert. And it so happens we have great search capabilities to find that expert, but we don't begin with the feature. We begin with the outcome. We begin with the benefit as well. This is not something that happens automatically. This is something that I suggest, like any creative process, it's not algorithmic, it's not deterministic. I wish I could give you the formula that just says, put these variables in here and the answer will pop out bottom. This is something you might want to put on the board, think about, come back a few days later, test off people. This is absolutely a creative process to get this right. It's not something you should just attempt to do in 30 minutes. But when you're looking for feedback, when you're looking for input from your employees or your customers or your partners, what I will say is a great approach is to use the old adage, it's much easier for people to criticize rather than synthesize. Oftentimes with my clients, when I've gone through a series of processes with them, I'll put this up and I say, here's what I think it is. I'm almost certainly wrong. And if that is the case, tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me how we can adjust that. It goes so much faster than just staring at a blank whiteboard or digital whiteboard, a mirror board or whatever we're using these days. So have a go. It will be wrong, and that's okay, because that's part of the sort of inward spiral to what done or what right looks like. So there's positioning for you. And here's an example. Now, this happens to be a B2C example. I'm a B2B guy myself, but I happen to watch this station here on, I say station, my goodness, I'm showing my age there. This, whatever it is on the Apple TV, it's called BritBox. And this streams British TV shows and movies, primarily TV shows. So their positioning statement will probably look something like this. It's for British people living abroad who want to watch British-based video content. It's a streaming video service that provides the biggest collection of British TV ever, with access to comedy, drama, and so on. Unlike Netflix and Hulu that have very limited and sometimes outdated British content, it gives you access to all the classic British TV to bring me back to my youth. I watch my classic Doctor Who to bring me back to youth, and also the very latest as well. So that might be a positioning statement for BritBox. Now, I would never see this as a consumer BritBox, but this positioning statement would now inform all the marketing, all the collateral that they now use to appeal to me as an expat living in the US. Now, they may have a variant of this. They may have a variant for an American who happens to be a bit of an Anglophile and just likes Monty Python and British comedy, right? So they might have a variant of this. But this forces you to crystallize what you do on a single page. It's got to be a single page. And think of it like a haiku. You've got to be really, really judicious and sparing with the words you use. No time for McKinsey-esque words here. And in fact, you see that, it's going to turn people straight off. Just say what it is you do. And you might be surprised, it will actually work a lot better than if you flower it up with unnecessary management consultancy speak. It's a good station, whatever it's called, app, whatever the word is these days, if you like British TV, by the way, BritBox. Okay, so let's see the next step in the process. So we've done our context setting. What's going on in the world? We've done a bit of positioning. What is it about our product? Let me crystallize haiku fashion, what it is we do, why it's unlike the alternatives, and what are the outcomes that we achieve. Now let's talk about messaging. This is the next step, and this really will become the foundation of everything you write, everything you say, and everything you do. And I have a good structure here to show you how to do this. It's called a messaging house. and it begins with an umbrella message. This is your 2-3 line summary of what it is you do. Yep, you heard me right. 2-3 lines, not 2-3 pages. Got to get out in 2-3 lines. We live in a too long, didn't read world. No one's got time to listen to you for half an hour before you get to the point. In fact, many times when I work with my clients, the very first thing I say, give me your pitch deck, and I'll just let them go. And I'll say, okay, you took about 37 minutes to get to the point of what you do there. You know, the traditional way of us giving presentations many years ago is we begin sort of like in a hypothesis method. We lay out the premises, we lay out observations, and then, 35, 40 minutes of the presentation is the big reveal. No, we've got to do the reveal up front. I'm a busy guy. In fact, there's a great saying that a friend of mine here in town, who's a presentation coach, says this. He says, the first 2 minutes of any presentation is cognitive hallowed ground. It's the only time people are paying attention. So don't squander it on things like, about us and technical architectures. Supporting the house, the roof of the house rather, are your 3 value statements or value propositions, whatever it might be. And 3, it's not 4, it's not 1, it's 3. And I'm usually pretty adamant about my clients. You need to get it to 3. So why 3? Why not 5? Why not 10? Surely more is better. Well, it turns out as humans, our brains are wired to be pattern recognition machines. And 3 is the smallest number of data points you need to create a pattern. And it's pretty much getting close to how much we can keep in our head. So that's why you're probably familiar with many triptychs you've heard in your time: better, faster, cheaper, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, blood, sweat, and tears. You can think of a dozen of these triptychs, of these 3 phrase terms, and that's where you want to get down to. What is it we do in 3 clear value propositions? But that's not enough for me. Okay, you say you do some stuff. Here's your value propositions. Where's your evidence? Where's your proof? Where's your credibility? Where's your pedigree? Who have you done this before? Because I don't like risk. I don't like change, and I certainly don't like risky change. So who else have you done before? So here's where you put that foundation of the house, the cement block that underpins that entire house, that says who you've done it before. And that's it. It's that simple. Again, it's not something you can just crack out in one day or 1 hour. You've got to spend time in it, introspect, think about it, test it. But this is where you want to be getting to, because then this is what your creative agency or your creatives will want. Because every time you write a blog, every time you do a presentation, every time you're standing main stage at a conference, whatever it is, you want to be drilling back this value proposition, because this is what people are going to take away from you. So it needs to be crisp and clear. So let's have a look at one. All right. So my little presentation thing. Yeah. This is for an ABM, an account-based management tool, if anyone's familiar. So it might be this: the world of B2B marketing has changed. To be successful, B2B technology marketeers have realized ABM is the way forward. If they don't embrace ABM, they'll find themselves in the spam box next to all the other spam. But many companies struggle. They don't have the marketing tools or the process or the skills or experience to implement ABM. So here I'm giving a high-level contextual situation. I'm pointing out some problems that people are facing, and they should resonate with me as a marketeer. And so we do, if I screw this up, sorry, I'm using this new presentation tool. So we fix this problem, and it's all we do. It's our passion. Across people, process, and technologies, we implement ABM faster, better, and with less risk than customers trying to do it themselves. And we've done it for Lorem Inc., Ipsum Inc., and so on and so forth, right? So here's your 3 different ones. Hopefully you want to juxtapose them or label different. So we had Lorem Inc. up and running in 6 weeks. We had Ipsum Inc. doing it at a cost of 50% of what they estimated. And, Dolo Inc. tried doing it 3 times themselves and failed, and we got it done in 2 months. Whatever it might be, here is at best your 3 best references, and make them punchy and to the point. And that's it. That's what a messaging house should look like. And so my challenge to you is, for whatever it is you do, your company, see if you can crystallize what it is you do in a messaging house format like that. All right, moving on to the last bit, storytelling. And there's other bits and pieces, other tools in here, like persona developments and ideal customer profiles and competitive alternatives, solution feature benefit charts, a lot of other tools you can use to do this and to help inform you, and I recommend you do, but I'm just trying to give you a high-level view. So let's talk about stories. Right, well, the first thing is, particularly in a B2B context, and I'm a B2B guy, I won't make any apologies for that. So often my clients rely on logic to make their claim. Premise one, premise two, therefore you should buy. You have a database, it's slow, ours is faster, therefore you should buy. And we think a logical claim is sufficient to make our case. So here we're using this old Greek triptych of logos, pathos, and ethos. So logos stands for logic, reason, and proof. Ethos is where we're taking credibility, trust, and pathos is where we're talking about emotions and values. And we often in B2B just rely on logos. Now B2C often is much more around pathos, emotions, and values. We're trying to make an emotional connection. You're going to look awesome driving down the freeway in that open top Porsche Cabriolet or whatever it might be, right? But we shouldn't forget all three of these legs when we're developing any messaging, and particularly in the B2B concept. Don't forget that emotional thing. At the end of the day, we're selling to a human being who has desires and fears and concerns and wants a promotion and wants the recognition and wants acknowledgement and all those things. At the end of the day, every decision to purchase is an emotional decision. Now, I grant you, in a B2B context, sometimes you have committee-based buying, which somehow might dilute the emotions that go along with that. But someone somewhere is going to the CFO and saying, I need $500,000 to buy this. And they're putting their credibility on the line to do it. So don't forget about that emotional thing. So how do we translate this into storytelling? Well, how many times have you found yourself doing this? Let me just get through this deck. I'm just going to speak to a few slides. We have a few slides to get through first. We're apologetic of the slides that we're using. We're apologetic of the story we're about to tell. And that means we really should be much more in the business of telling stories. And the greatest success I see is when you can tell your story with no slides. Now that's ironic coming from me who's using slides right here, but you get the gist. So let's talk about a typical story arc that you might find within a pitch, right? We're going to begin with the too long, didn't read, the executive summary. Here's what you're going to get out of it, right? That's that cognitive high ground. Then we want to do the context setting, and we want to talk about the challenge, and we talk about the solution, and then we talk about the wrap. But we want to talk about it in terms of the hero. So we're going to begin that cognitive high ground. We're going to use emotional logos, ethos, and pathos techniques of telling that. Usually along the way, we are doing discovery. If this is a live presentation, we're saying, did that make sense to you? Did that resonate? Did that work? Did you understand that? Do you have any questions? That will be typically here. But what we want to do is put our customer in the center of the story. We want to make them the hero. So whatever story we tell, we want them to identify with the hero in the story. Let me tell you a story about a CEO. He's a startup CEO. He had a great idea, but he was struggling to bring on new people. He couldn't afford them. He looked at a CMO and it was going to cost him better part of $300,000 a year. There's no way he could afford to do that. And it was getting him down. He couldn't progress his agenda. He couldn't do what he wanted to do. And he was getting more and more frustrated. So that's the beginning. That is classic. It's a tool called the Freytag pyramid. You watch many a movie, it'll follow the same structure of the Freytag pyramid. And then the hero meets a guide. And let's say in this case, the hero meets Growth Match, for example. And then all of a sudden, the hero meets Growth Match. And Growth Match gave him access to a whole bunch of experts at fractional costs and so on and so forth. And in the end, the hero was able to solve his problem and everything was fine. And then we wrap up and close the story. So we tell that story in such a way that the listener, the audience of that story, identifies with the hero. And he says, you know what? I want to be that hero. That's me. I want to be that hero. And of course, our answer is you too can be that hero of the story. So don't underestimate. There's a lot more reading to do on this. It's a really fascinating area. And the reason why it's so resonant with us is we've been telling stories to one another around the campfire for tens of thousands of years. Our brain is so finely tuned to resonate with stories back to Greek mythology and beyond. We are tuned to resonate with these stories of heroes and struggles. So think about this when you tell your story. It should be engaging and it should leave the listener with a desire to be part of your story or to be the hero in your story. And of course, let's never forget, we've got to close with the what's in it for me. It's not about us, it's about them. So the WIFM is a phrase often used in marketing. You've got to solve for the WIFM. What's in it for me? Why do I care about this? The other thing I'd say in telling the story is the need to be authentic. I'm not expecting anyone here to tell the same story throughout an entire company in the same fashion. We've got to use our own language, our own words, because that's when we come off being authentic. And I put the phrase here, weekend language. It's a great book, actually, called Weekend Language, by a guy called Andy Craig. And basically his question is, why is it we tell such fantastic stories standing around the barbecue on the weekend with a cold beer in our hand, but we're terrible at telling stories in the business? Why is it? It's because we don't use accessible weekend language. And I think perhaps younger folk I've come across in my career feel a little bit unsure of themselves, and they think they need to unnecessarily dress up their language with McKinsey-esque speaking. And I get that. But as we get a little more gray around the temples, we get a bit older, there's no harm using just authentic, accessible weekend language. It makes your story pop so much more than putting in confusing, inaccessible, unnecessary, complex words that people sometimes even admit, I don't really understand what that is, but I'm afraid to tell you that. So I'm just going to let you rattle on for the next 30 minutes and show you out here. If you show yourself to be a human being, to connect with another human being in the room or across a mirror board, or across a Zoom call rather, that's a much better way of doing it. So there it is, all in one unnecessarily complex chart. But these are all the things I want you to think about storytelling. So in summary, we have talked about context setting. We've talked about the need to understand what it is your customers are facing in terms of challenges, what's going on in the industry, and what happens if they don't do anything about it. Positioning, how to uniquely position your product within the context of an existing category, pointing out what it is you do, but also where you're unlike the alternatives. Not forgetting the biggest unlike you should be spending your time in is not doing anything at all. There's nothing easier than saying, I'm going to pass and not do anything, and concluding with benefits, not features. And then we talked about messaging, right? Having that lovely, crisp messaging house. Here's my umbrella statement. Here's the problems you face. Here's my 3 value propositions: faster, better, cheaper. And we've done it for A, B, and C. Would you like to chat more? Whatever that might be, that's going to be your messaging house. And then finally, the business of storytelling. We're telling stories in which our customers are to see themselves as the hero in the story, rather than just playing out a logical case of premise 1, premise 2, therefore you should buy. Doesn't work. A little bit about me. My name is Will Scott. I'm based in Austin, Texas, from the UK originally. I'm a fractional CMO. I'm one of Growth Match's experts. And I've worked for a lot of companies, big companies, small companies, startups, hardware, software, services, SaaS. About 5 years ago, I went out and hung my own shingle, as they say here in the States. And that's what I do. And with that, I'll take questions. You can go on mute if there's any questions.
I'll start because I put one in chat regarding the positioning section. So I think this idea of picking a category is really interesting, and this is something that we're working on at Growth Match, and that I know a number of other founders are working on right now. And so I'm curious, how do you choose? How do you know when you I think the example you gave in your presentation was, we could be a database tool or BI tool or analytics tool. So like, once you've figured out a short list of categories that you think you could position the product to be in, how do you choose?
Yeah, it is. And it certainly is, we never forget the power of testing in this world. And when we're having those conversations, having that situational fluency, my first sort of instinct and response to that, Shelby, is, when you started your company, you may have an idea of what category you fit in, and certainly begin with that, right? But take the time just to sort of, suspend belief for a while, or, to blue sky, as they say. What other categories could we be? And it doesn't mean they're right or wrong, just what other categories could be, and take a moment and pause and contemplate and say, if we were to be that category, how would it change our story? How would it change how people contextualize what it is we do? April Dunford actually gives a fantastic example. It's a great book. I've forgotten the name of it. She's fantastic read on this. She gives an example of one of her companies that originally positioned themselves as an email tool for lawyers. And what was really clever about this email tool was its ability to collaborate on documents in a secure fashion with very controlled, finely granular permissions access. So that particular company she worked for, she thought, again, are we an email tool? There's a pretty crowded space out there. Maybe we're a collaboration tool. Maybe we're a document management tool. Maybe we're some other kind of tool as well. So it's almost like taking that moment to discard your cognitive biases, Shelby. And it's a real easy thing not to do that, right? Because you've anchored yourself on that. Just take a moment over a couple of beers and shoot the breeze with not only people internally, but external people you trust, to say, what else could we be? and how would that change our story? And then taking that time to test some of those out there.
Yeah. Cool.
I have another question around category, if we're on it, because I think I've been confused by the concept of category for a while. The way I understood your category to mean is one of the most important things about it is that it is understood by people, right? They have a way of then categorizing you. And I think in the past, we've worked with people who have perhaps just used a different vocabulary, and they've used category to mean like that industry niche that you own specifically, that, you know, for example, like no code, or you know, when Shelby and I were working on a marketplace for event freelancers, we were advised to, you know, make your category the trust economy, to as opposed to what everyone expects as the gig economy, right? Like to use it as a way of differentiating yourself. What's that thing called in branding, positioning, messaging?
Yeah, it's not category. It's something else. I'll have to think of the word. But yeah, I know we're going to talk about. It's more almost like, I want to say genre, but that's not the right word. There is a word for it. The category. The point of category is, as I say, people are fearful of things they don't understand, and so they at minimum want to anchor you to something they can approximate you to. And you can soften this with some words like we're somewhat like, you know, we're not dissimilar to, we're adjacent to. People sometimes think of us, and that's quite a powerful tool I've found used in the past, is people sometimes think of us as a database, but we're not. But it's easy for them to think about it, but stick with me here. And that just, now I can feel the tension going from my chest. Okay, you've given me something I can at least anchor on here, but you're going to correct me, that's okay. But until then, when you say we're unlike anything you've ever seen before, like, oh, okay, now I'm a little bit nervous about that. So there you go. Any other questions?
What are the? Go ahead.
Well, no, this is Leslie. I just wanted to add something to that, which was interesting. I lead salespeople. I've led salespeople for a very long time. Don't want to tell you how long, but many of my salespeople are always uncomfortable, even bringing up, you know, who our competitors might be. And it's interesting because when you do tell people, you know, I always say, make yourself the same before you make yourself different. And that sameness may be a competitor that is very recognized in our space, or it may be, as you say, a database example before you actually deviate for the unique, you know, abilities of our solution or our product. And it helps a lot. So I do have a follow-up question, but
I think that's a good point. And it's a little bit of, I won't say a sneaky type, but it's always, I never, ever diss the competition. I just say, yeah, that company, they're a great company. If you want someone to do this, you should absolutely go talk to them. But here's how we're different.
exactly.
You know, and yeah, of course you've got competitors. I always say, you know, I was talking to Shelby and Zach here, and there's a few other companies like Growth Match are saying it's a good thing you have competitors because it validates that you're legit. If you were the only person in the world doing this, it's like, hang on a minute, how does that work? Do you know what I mean? So it's a good thing to have competitors, and it keeps you on your toes as well. But go ahead, Leslie, another question.
Well, the question that I have for you is, first of all, thank you for your overview and the visual support. I think it's just a clear reminder of the importance of process and structure, and that you can't really wing this, and you shouldn't. And so, but my question to you, based on your own proof points on the customers that you've worked with, I come from working with a lot of corporate Fortune 500 companies. I had the pleasure of working alongside Disney for a long time and took a storytelling workshop with Disney. So I appreciate your storytelling component. When you work with startups, I have found that the startups, the CEOs, the co-founders believe that they can build it on their own. And I know why, right? Because they're just brilliant, and it's an innate, and it's their baby. And it's always this kind of like, you know, push-pull of like leveraging their innate experience and insights with a process and structure of someone that is an expert. So in your position, have you found that in working with startups and, you know, CEOs, and then how do you kind of bridge that gap?
So that's a great question. And yeah, I've got a couple of observations here. First of all, this cannot be a top-down, this is how it's going to be. I know that's what startup CEOs want to be, but actually the very process of being collaborative and developing this in a company can actually illuminate disconnects that you didn't even know were there. And I've seen conversations like, oh, hang on a minute, I didn't think that's what we positioned ourselves as. And then someone was saying, no, that's what we do. Like just the very therapeutic process of collaborating in a team can surface all manner of disconnects that the CEO had no idea was being there. And by the way, what I do when I work with clients with is I go and work with the individuals. And I say to the CEO or the VP, whoever sponsors me, is like, hey, Shelby, I don't want you showing up on that call. Because if you do, they're not going to say a word, right? I'll come and read out to you afterwards what was said, but you're going to ruin my call. If you're going to ruin my experiment, if you come and pitch up on that call, you're going to contaminate it in a terrible way. The other thing is, and it's very hard for any of us to acknowledge the fact we come with so many cognitive biases. We do. We come with preconceptions that we don't even know we're doing. It's fascinating. I'm going to tell you a quick story here, which I was reading this. It might have been a podcast. I don't remember. I was reading this fascinating story about cognitive biases. This is true. Nothing to do with marketing messaging position. They took two groups of people. They put them in a situation where they had to do what was essentially a math test. And they gave them a bunch of stats and they asked, what's your conclusion in regards to the stats at the end of looking at all these stats? And they gave them the formula and everything. It was a math test, right? And in scenario one, they gave them a test where they said, should you use skin cream if you want softer skin? That was the context of the question. And 98% of them came with the correct answer at the end of that. I'm not going to say what the correct answer is, but they came with the correct answer because they solved what was an easily identifiable math test using the data. They took exactly the same problem, but changed the nouns and put it in the context of gun control. And only 47% of the people got the math test right. Only 47%. The math was identical. The nouns changed. And the conclusion of this is our brain actually turns off cognitive capability when confronted with something it doesn't want to be true. We don't even know we're doing it. It switches it off because we don't want that thing to be true. It's very hard to explain to people, and make them understand that, but cognitive bias things. So my pitch is, look, I'm not an expert in whatever you do, but I've been in B2B tech for 25 years. So I can fathom most things pretty quickly. I'm not coming with any bags. I got no dog in this hunt, right? I'm going to be gone in 6 weeks and things like that. But I'm going to come without bags and make of it what you will. And if you want to overrule me at the end of the day, that's it. But I'm going to come in and collaborate with the team and give you that fresh perspective and put a marketer's eye on it as well. So that's the sort of my advice to the CEO, who I know often thinks they do have all the answers. Anyway, I thought it was an interesting.
By the way, not mine. Mine does happen to have all of the answers. It was just an example. So, all right, thank you.
Andrew, did you have one? You had your hand up earlier on.
Yeah, just wondering about how you're testing, ways to test these types of ideas, like your category and other like key parts of your marketing. Is this just talking, collaborating within your team, or is it surveys and stuff like that?
There certainly is. I mean, with larger customers, I've done messaging validation. You can certainly do messaging validation. It's very important to position that call in a very particular way. Hey, Andrew, I'm going to talk to you about some work that I'm doing with XYZ company. So validate some messages from ideas. A couple of things I want you to know for sure. One, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I have no interest in whether you buy from this company or not. Two, this means nothing for the product you're using right now. Don't worry about it. Nothing's changing. All I'm doing is seeking your valued guidance, candor, and feedback on this messaging to see what resonates with you. So you certainly can do third party. The other thing is you just got to go with the flow and say, hey, I'm going to try this today and see if it resonates better. And you don't have to do many before you start saying, boy, that eyes really lit up when I use these categories or this framing or highlighted this topic than when I didn't. Experimentation is a function of marketing. And sadly, many of the CEOs who know everything in the world, Leslie, don't understand that you can't deterministically know perfect marketing. You got to test. And sometimes that means it's live fire exercises. You just have to do it. And that's the reality. That's my advice is you got to test.
Can I add something onto that, Will? Just so Zach and I have worked on a number of startups together, and I think your actual tactics for testing vary depending on the stage that you're at. So if you're really, really early stage, did I freeze?
Now you're back again. You're good. You froze momentarily.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is your tactics will vary depending on what stage you're at. So if you're super early stage, then doing customer interviews, whether you have to go incentivize participants or if you happen to have an audience or build an audience and you can get interview participants, then just doing some interviews early using a description of your product or whatever, that can be that's kind of how we iterated on our positioning and messaging early for Growth Match. And then once you're a little bit later and you're ready to start selling the product, then your sales conversations become like fertile ground for doing this testing. And like, this is the example that I was giving earlier. The question I asked about testing category, this is something we're working on right now. And we're kind of using our sales demos and sales conversations to test this positioning. And like sales demos not going as well as we had hoped was the first signal that something was off. And after talking about it as a team, we thought maybe our category is wrong. Maybe we need to rethink how we're positioning the product in the right category. And so, and then, once you're at like significantly later, and depending on your type of product, if you're consumer or whatever, and you have a larger user base, then, it becomes much, much easier to get sufficient volume in surveys and stuff like that. It's quite difficult to get enough volume in surveys when you're really early, unless you've happened to build like a pretty healthy wait list flow or something.
Yeah, like feeling category as a double-edged sword really resonates with me. Like you can't not have one, but if you choose the wrong one, it's really bad. Especially because of all the undoing you have to do if you're selling into it, and the category provided context or created assumptions in the customer that were untrue.
And again, it's an ideal opportunity if you do have friendly customers. And even I can see this as using a sales tool. I've used that before as well. Look, I want to seek your advice, Leslie. You're a really trusted, valued customer. We're working some testing here. We're tossing up some ideas of different categories that we should put ourselves in. You know us, you've used us, but here's some of the categories we're thinking of. Could you give us advice? There's nothing more powerful than asking someone for the favor or the input. They really feel when you invite them in the tent, they're special. And especially if they see their words appear in your messaging, like they're now got a little bit of investment, like it or not, in your company. Like they see a piece of themselves in it.
Yeah.
So I had a good question earlier on. Zach and I were talking earlier on, which is, how do you know you're done? How do you know this has worked out right? And my challenge is everyone in the company should be able to tell the messaging house, everyone, from the receptionist on up to the CEO. I'm not asking you that it all should be verbatim the same. They should put their own authentic spin in it, but they should hit the key points on it. And so my sort of scenario is this, and I'll give it to Zach. Zach, I'm your ideal customer profile. I'm the CEO of a startup. I'm just pre-found, I've got some angel money. I've got a few $100,000 in the bank. I'm really struggling. I need to get some help before I do my round A, and I'm struggling to hire people. I'm that perfect profile. And I meet you in the elevator or in the lobby or whatever of the Four Seasons downtown or something like that. Hey, Zach, how's it going? So I've got about 90 seconds while my car's being brought around the front. Growth Match, what do you do?
Let me give this a shot. All startup founders have knowledge and experience gaps on the team, but they struggle to find and afford the perfect fit. Growth Match is a service, a matchmaking service and marketplace that connects these founders with fractional specialists to fill these gaps. In short, we help them find 1, the right person, 2, quickly, and 3, affordably. And we do this for startups like yours who have been through Techstars, 500 startups, and are backed by great VCs.
Thanks very much. The valet's here with my car. Here's my card. Give me a call. That's the challenge, right? I mean, that's what it needs to be, that crisp, that clear. Do you see? Let's look at what he did there, right? He didn't start with, I'm Zach, I've started up 5 companies with my buddy Shelby, and we did this. No, he started off with me. I immediately connected with him, and then he showed me my problems. Yeah, I'm struggling hiring people. It's friggin' Austin. It's impossible to hire people. My God, they're so expensive as well. How do I get people, right? So he connected with me, and then he laid out his 3 value propositions, right? Those three things that we're going to give you: the right people, fast and affordably. And we've done it for these people. There's my credibility claims right there. That's all I've got time for, Zach, but it sounds interesting. I'll give you a call. That, I mean, I'll be honest, folks, there's a little bit of setup there, but you get the gist, right? That's the kind of ultimate challenge.
I wanted to dig into, because this is obviously I had questions around testing. Shelby had one, Andrew did. It's a really interesting topic, obviously, because we're trying to take these frameworks you've given us and use them in our real lives. You mentioned earlier that one of the things you're looking for are physical signs that a message is resonating with someone. You said things like their eyes are lighting up. Shelby and I have talked about the nod rate, and not the nod of I understand that, like the nod of approval, like the oh, that's cool nod. What are some other physical signs that your messages resonate with someone?
It's a really good question. It's hard. It's so much harder to do virtually these days. It really is. But watching their attention, watching are they looking at the screen? Are they checking their Slack screen? Are they looking down the phone? All the old adages. You know what I like? This is what I liken it to. I was thinking about this. I was putting this deck together last week. So we all have 3 or 4 stories that we can roll out at a dinner table, right? We just have the old favorites. I've got the time I was married to my wife in Louisiana, and we ended up in a dive Louisiana biker bar, and my whole family ended up dancing with the bikers, and everything was great. I've got like 4 or 5 of them, right? But they're finely tuned. We've told them so many times. We know exactly how to tell them. We know the right pauses, the right intonations, the right hesitations to elicit that response that we want, almost like a comedian doing a stand-up bit. And a lot of that, Zach, as you probably know, is going to be just you're delivering the message. And you can see that moment. You can see that nod. You can see that pause that's authentic, and they're thinking about it and they're considering it. You know the right time not to say anything else. Here's what we do. I'm not saying another word, because if I sound saying, yeah, after this, it sounds like I'm apologizing for something. I told you what I do, and let them pause. And all. It's you can't sprinkle, fairy dust on anyone and make them. It's just a matter of practice and knowing people, right? But the classics, intonation, hesitation, glancing away, all those things are signs that something's not right.
So I have a I guess kind of related question. Well, not so much about testing, but let's say you're in a scenario where you've developed this messaging house and you found that there was a lot of disconnect between how maybe your sales folks, your CS team, whatever, were thinking about, we're delivering this message. How do you align the team, and how do you make sure there's consistency without it being mechanical? And how do you make sure that that messaging house that looks good on the chart gets translated appropriately into other formats, like your web content or any stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a good approach, and I've seen it done. I mean, it's a technique you can use for lots of different things in a company, even delivering sales decks, right? It's not necessarily having people stand up and present, but that might be the case. It might be, you pair people off to go off and hear the story, and learn from each other about the ways you can tell the story. We've even seen situations where, even though people are in the same building, they've set up fake Zoom calls just to see what it's like to deliver the message across a Zoom interface. Like many things, it's practice. And I think you've got to stress those rules of, please use your own language. I'm English. I'm from Britain. I use a particular lexicon. I've a particular language, particular words that I use. You guys will have something different. As soon as it sounds forced, I'm now a bit dubious of you, Shelby. It feels like you're just giving me the pitch and you're selling me. I don't like that. But if you're using authentic, and if you're energized, if you're smiling, if you're getting excited what you're talking about, I'm going to feed off you. It's that whole mirroring thing, right? I'm going to feed off you. It's a matter of practice. It really is. And that's it. But then, having the peers set up in different groups, not 2 sales guys, right? Put a CS guy and a sales guy in a pair together, right? Put a sales engineer and, I don't know, the exec in the same room together. Have them test off each other. And it's interesting because you can oftentimes refine your own story when you hear, oh, that's a different angle. I hadn't thought of that angle before. I hadn't thought of phrasing it that way before. You just can learn from other people as well. I hope that was useful, folks. It's an exciting thing. It's pretty boring, but you've got to do it. don't jump straight to expensive campaigns. Don't jump straight to AI-enabled chatbots. That's all cool stuff, right? And I do that as well. That's great. But this is the go square on the Monopoly board. You got to start here. You skip it at your peril. I'm sure you all know that. Yeah, you skip it at your peril.
Cool. Well, does anyone else have any burning questions before we wrap up? Raise your hand. So, no, or just unmute. No, nobody burning questions. Going once, going twice. All right. So, like I said, we recorded this. We will follow up and send out the recording, and I also will share Will's contact info if anybody has follow-up questions, and we'll share along with the video if Will has any other links that he mentioned. We'll find that April Dunford book as well, and some other resources that he mentioned.
I can do that.
But Will, we really appreciate this. Thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience. It's really meaningful that you took the time to do this for us. And everyone else, we will reach out. We're going to schedule the next specialist workshop for probably mid-March, and might do a few events in between now and then. So keep an eye out for that stuff. Hope you can join some additional workshops that we do.